Hello, welcome to Varn Vlog. And I've been getting a lot of comments today because I've been talking to people like Stephen Grumbine and Jonathan Cadman and people related to MMT. And people seem to think that I have rejected Marxism to court. I haven't. And a lot of the assumptions I hear made by MMTers, I've never seen them prove. And I want to talk about this because a lot of times when they say labor theory of value is wrong, they don't know what all of us mean by labor theory of value. It's actually contested within Marxist circles of self. They'll say the declining rates of profits is wrong, but then they'll believe things like Claire Mattei's capitalist order. But the thing is, Mattei's understanding of why there were shifts in the capitalist order is directly related to profit rates. You can't believe both things, nor can you take Marxist class analysis and then say we're rejecting the whole basis of that class analysis and tell us we're going to fight capitalism. You can't. Now, I do understand the claims of MMT. All right? I agree with quite a few of them against other Marxists, and I'm going to state that first. One, the countries with significant productive capacity will be able to have a monetary policy that allows them to use the legal power of their money on a world market in such a way that they do not have to worry about the same constraints on the supply side of money, and what they actually have to worry about is production. So if the money gets too hot, if it gets too liquid, you will have inflation because of production limitations. Those limitations can be either political or physical, but they exist. Now, you will notice that is not the theory of inflation that someone like Warren Mosler has. Warren Mosler's form of MMT, and I'm tired of MMTers telling me that they all agree on this stuff. In fact, many people who are claimed as MMTers are just legal theory of moneyists who actually don't necessarily agree with all the assertions of modern monetary theory. They're just not neoclassicals. So what do we mean by that? All right. Currency, state money, is a monopoly of taxability. It is not the only form of money that has ever existed. There are two theories of it. There is the Chartilist and neo-chartalist view. Chartilism is associated with the German historical school economist Friedrich Knapp, and the neo-chartalist view, which was actually adopted by Alfred Michel Innes in Britain. Now, Chartilism was actually not really the dominant school picked up in the German historical school of economics. A kind of post-Marxianism was picked up. Chartism, which was the first monetary policy of the fascists in Germany, was close to Chartilism as its assumptions. The Marxists made a bunch of huge mistakes. There were two mistakes they made, and they're contradictory mistakes. One is Hilferding focused on the development of monopoly capital and the development of state capital into encouraging capital growth, so that by consolidating capital into singular monopoly businesses, all the state would have to do is take them over by democratic fiat. The other was the immiseration theory, something that Marx believed himself for part of his life. And I know there's people like Andrew Kleiman who will say this is not true. I cannot find any evidence against it. In letters in the 1850s, he actually stated pretty clearly that he thought capitalism was going to fall apart because the crisis were going to drive the workers into poverty, and that would lead to a revolution. That did not happen. That led to the really focusing on understanding capital more in the 1860s and his revisions of Capital Volume 1 and his early drafts of Capitals Volume 2 and 3, which were unfinished. He also doesn't fully articulate a very coherent understanding of the theory of the rate of profit to fall based purely on his assumption that machines are fixed capital. Now, I do think machines are fixed capital, and I do think labor really matters, which is why things that do not involve labor actually require rents. All right. Rents, however, can be traded as commodities and capital, so something has a dual nature. You can, just like labor power is traded as a commodity. Is it only a commodity? No. Now, when people go, well, Derek, you reject labor theory of value, you don't know which form of labor theory of value I believe in. I do not think value in that way is actually manifest in the individual price of an item. It is manifested in the aggregate and failure to meet that aggregate. And we have plenty of evidence that it is real, and it explains the shifts in capital, something that I cannot get from modern monetary theorists. Now, Stephen Grumbine and people like that answer a lot of my questions quite well. But the idea that they've explained that, the capital orders need to shift, the explanation for why it needed to shift was a decline in profit rates. Keynesianism was seen as an answer for that. Fascism was seen as an answer for that. New Dealism was seen as an answer for that, all of which had Bonapartist tendencies, meaning that there was an empowerment of a singular executive to increase the role of state and capital, to change a lot of the money structures, and to increase state investment. That was true in all three scenarios. You cannot explain that to me, nor can you explain the shift to neoliberalism just in greed, or that the government is allowing for price gouging because it won't negotiate prices down. Now, the latter is Warren Mosler's theory of inflation. Now, purchasing power and monopsony power, which are very important, are also related to inflation. So both we have the overheating of liquidity and monopsony power. Marx does not really deal with these. So if people just want to come out at me and say I'm a doctrinaire Marxist, they're wrong. I'm not. Since these areas were not things generally understood in periods of classical economy, and if anyone did understand them, believe it or not, it was someone like Thomas Malthus, not in his writings on population, which are wrong, but his writings on all general economy and the stimulation of demand. But the reason why I'm not a pure modern monetary theorist is that I am unconvinced by a couple of things that they seem to hand wave away. One, spectrum of sovereignty. What makes a nation sovereign? You have to do the work. Well, what is the work? Well, the work is primitive accumulation, development of productive forces, and the establishment of military power. Why is that latter important? Because you have to compel people to be in alliance with you if it's not in their advantage to use your currency. And once you become an international currency, you lose national power over it, which is why places like China don't just switch on the MMT button. If you do not know that, you cannot explain current events. Other things you cannot explain is why China's profit rate growth has slowed. Its GDP has slowed. Now you may go, well, GDP is an ineffective way to understand the real economy. And I agree with you. But the idea that it measures nothing is wrong. And there's this weird shift game that a lot of people in this heterodox economics camps do when they just will reject certain kinds of analysis outright, not because it's wrong, but because they don't want to deal with the category. Like the category of the difference between commodity profits and rents is not something I see MMTers ever deal with. They basically treat all commodities as monopoly commodities and thus rents, meaning their prices are totally set by the market. Then the reality are set by the government basically, and price setting is thus backdoored down to the government's acceptance of certain payments. But I've never seen proof of that, and it doesn't make sense in an international economy except in the core states with developed militaries. When I point out that even many states that they like, people who argue for decoupling and what someone like Michael Hudson proposes, that they can't really explain the shift from finance capital to rentier capital again, other than like parasites from outside. But that's not the case. And we have evidence for it. But we even have evidence for profit rate declines until there's enough destruction of demand for them to rise again. That's why there are business cycles. There are not business cycles because of just capitalist wants to discipline labor or something like that. I have never actually gotten a good answer from any of the MMTers on my show about why there are business cycles. Now, I've already said, I agree with monetary theorists that government currency, it's unlimited. The state can't run out of it. That's absolutely true. It can decouple from purchasing power, aka what I would consider value, and value is fixed on markup. Markup from what? The cost of labor. The exploitation is involved that workers do not get the full cost of the full value of their labor. And even Marx realizes that you can't really run an economy of that. You still have to deal with social surplus and stuff like that. So don't at me about that either. That's clearly spelled out. You can go read Janapel's stuff about this. The other thing is, though, if you believe in like working class power, but you get rid of how we define the working class, those people who are paid under their value, that because none of that matters, then I don't understand why you think that there's a class tension in the first place. The Marxist MMT hybriders have never actually convinced me that they have a viable reason other than political will. It's very hard to explain all this in political will, and it's also very hard to explain why capital would need to change any of its arrangements if political will was only the thing that was driving everything. Furthermore, fiat currency, as in government money, is not the only kind of currency that's ever existed. And there's plenty of evidence for that. Metalism tends to develop not just because something is downstream of a major imperial state, although some MMTers will argue this about why silver and gold were dominated in the Middle Ages, but also because metalism as a commodity can trade in ways that are useful beyond any state's ability to assert power over it. We now live in a place where the states are powerful enough to not need that, and thus we don't rely on deflationary commodity money. Commodity money is inherently deflationary because commodities have use. Even gold and whatnot has use. Its use as money seems to be because it was highly convertible as a metal, a soft metal that you could break down, melt from a bar into something you could wear as a ostensible sign of wealth, or something you could use and then turn it back into some other kind of commodity. Now, there's no reason that gold has any value on the market beyond that. And thus, it is kind of a collective illusion that it was inherently valuable, unlike Marxist, Goldbergs, and whoever. So the reason why I'm still not an MMTer is I find many of your answers not sufficient. And I find your adoption of Marxist frameworks to not make sense. Even if we agree that Marx overprivileged commodity money and credit money, which he does, absolutely, that he, like even Knapp, by the way, misunderstood the origins of money in barter, which is just historically not justifiable. The origins of money seem to be in credit and debt relations, which were internal to a tribe, and commodity styles of money were in anything like barter were done between groups with low levels of social trust. To understand this, to understand how much of MMT I've taken on, that we can't say that, current monetary value is totally tied to some commodity, that there's no secret basket of commodities which is really backing it up. Right? Totally agree with you there. But I don't think nominal money is value. Nor have I been convinced of the few theories of inflation I have heard from MMTers. Now, I'm also not convinced of neoclassical or classical theories of inflation. It's not about the money supply. It's about production limits. But MMTers, to me, cannot explain the shifts in capital management, shifts that Marx did not see. The reason why they can't explain it is that why would they happen if they are right that all this is just about, state power and state money printing? Why would there have ever been a crisis of capital in the first place? I don't understand how you like Clara Mattei's book and reject the very ground theory which justifies it. Mattei's not attacking MMT because we realize that Marxists have not done good work on money. It is a major problem. But when MMTers basically say that, oh, well, you've clearly rejected labor theory of value, no, I haven't. Value production is still related to the labor put into it. It is not related to some nominal currency floating because the purchasing power is important. Nominal currency flows is not something that I actually give that much of a shit about. I've learned a lot from MMTers, and I've had to change a lot of my views, but there's never any reversal. I've never seen an MMTer in my entire life admit that there are other major factors in the economy other than their calculations about money. They'll say things that agree with me, like, oh, the limits of our economy is the limits of our production, but they won't actually define why that matters. Because we can make stuff, and we can make stuff with more credit, and more credit means we can make more stuff, right? Except that's never what happens. Now you can say, well, that's class stuff here, but again, you've undercut the reasons why we think class exists. Now, this means Marxism needs a major revision, but so does MMT. And I've never met an MMTer who was comfortable with that. And that is why so many people don't deal with them, even though they've been incredibly innovative in understanding money. That is why so many people consider them cargo cultists, frankly. And they don't want to hear it. And I know this is going to make a lot of my allies mad. I think MMTers have to divide amongst themselves and figure out their relationship to these other categories. They are right that money is a legal creature. They are right that inflation is not primarily about the quantity of money floating about. They are right the state cannot run out of money, but they're not the only people who think that. They are right that the fear of austerity is political. It is a political decision in a lot of cases. But they cannot explain to me why these shifts happen. And they cannot explain to me why you can't get countries to agree on broad scale, currency exchanges if they're a developing country. Why doesn't China want to become the primary bank reserve currency? Because if it did, it would be subject to international capital in a way that it is now, but it would be more so. To do that, it would have to act a lot more like the United States, which it doesn't want to do, and more power to them. So this is my challenge to you. Instead of just saying, oh, well, you clearly signed up to this, you think labor theory of value is wrong. No, I don't. I don't think value is what you think it is. Now, you may come at me, value is super abstract, but power. What do you mean by power? Do you mean military bases? Do you mean productive capacity? You can't say that one thing is abstract and then posit it with another abstraction and then hide that. That's inconsistent. I know a lot of people, this is not so much MMTers, but these are people adjacent to them who do that exact thing. I've read your text. I understand them. I've interviewed people for 5 years. I understand the difference between post-Keynesianism and neo-chartalism. I understand the difference in political projects. In so much that modern monetary theory is right about government currency in the strong nations on a national market level, they're right about the legal nature of currency, etc. And they are working, and I will give them credit for this, on dealing with things like the development of productive forces or whatever. But they don't seem to be willing to accept that not everyone can do that in a capitalist system. They don't seem to be willing to accept that the changes in capital, the existence of the business cycle, do imply that profit rates matter, and that what drives them is not just nominal currency supply. And they have to admit that what they want actually requires complete micromanagement of the economy, even more than what Marxists demand. Because it's not just that most of the politicized MMTers who want to fight capitalism want, more money in the system. They want money invested in specific areas and limited who can use it, and taxation used to destroy other people's power. And if they don't do the latter, which a lot of them say, well, we should do the former first. We don't need it to do the latter. If you don't do the latter, the people with the monetary power, which is a measure of power, will stop you from doing the former. But what coalition would ever agree to tax itself apart? No. I'm still not on your side. And while I'm talking about that, I'm going to tell you about my understanding of profit rates. Now, this is from Michael Roberts' blog. I don't agree with Michael on everything, but this is why I haven't dropped the declining rates of profits, even though I don't think they're about money. Rate of profit. We see decline all throughout the 20th century. Its high point is after World War II. That makes a lot of sense. There's been a lot of destroyed capital. Profit rates jumped up from anemic during the Great Depression to 30-40%, but they fell dramatically as soon as there was any international competition. The developing up of Germany and Japan by the end of the 50s started leading to real competition. We had a spike of reinvestment through the relieving of taxes and the relieving of the post-war marginal tax rates, and then a decline also relatively quickly in the 70s. When neoliberalism is tried, we see a return of profitability, etc. These are our rates here. But when we address for the whole economy together, we see a pretty steep decline until neoliberalization, a huge decline in 2007, and a decline that started around 2015. And each business cycle, stuff does not fully return to the overall prior profit rate. Now, profits are up right now pretty high. There's been a lot of destruction of capacity. There's a whole reorganization going on. We might see this pop up. Do I think the decline in the rates of profits are going to lead to the end of capitalism? No. And so we can't sit on our laurels about this. There'll be some new form of management to emerge that'll temporarily restore the profit rates. It might be war. It might be a ton of things. Nor do I think like capitalists are planning wars around this or anything like this. And again, I completely agree with the MMTers. We can't run out of money. And that the money's value is based on the largest paymaster in the area, which is the federal government. They create the money, they tax it. The currency is not what I'm talking about. And we can use MMT-style policies to help us battle this, which is why I don't consider MMTers enemies anymore. But when people tell me, well, MMT is right and the labor theory of value is wrong, and yet they can't even tell me what they think I think the labor theory of value is, which is not the individual price of an item that can be priced in any way. It is the statistical aggregate of that price, which create a profit rate. And that there are things that push against that. Monopsony pricing power, because that effectively turns something into both a commodity and a rent. The destruction of capital stocks and surplus, the removal of dead labor. Anytime there's a massive reorganization of capital. So I'm also not telling people they can sit on their laurels and wait for the declining rate of profits to bring the revolution. It's not going to happen. But there's a bunch of questions that MMTers can't answer for me other than political will. And their theory for why political will does it is basically greed. And while there are MMTers who are anti-capitalist, the vast majority of them are not. So if they want to talk about progress or whatever, and they don't want to be seen as a cargo cult, perhaps they need to really understand why some of us who are even allies are still skeptical of some of their claims. Because a lot of MMTers seem to adopt frameworks where they reject the basis of the framework, and they don't even seem to know it.